Hello. So recently, I was discussing best way for those of us who are critical of modern Western feminism to approach it and to discuss, to have a dialogue with people, women in particular, who describe themselves as feminists. I reiterate what I said in that, which is I still think individually there are a lot of reasonable feminists out there. I don't believe that all feminists hate men, so I want to be absolutely clear about that. But there is very clear double standards at the heart of feminism that I think need to be discussed because it's rather insufferable, actually, how often we see this and how often a man is reprimanded in a way that a woman isn't. And there's a prominent recent example of this, and that is the last Prime Minister's questions. Now, Theresa May is in China on a 3 day visit. I believe that's ending tomorrow. Might have ended today. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a working visit to secure trade. I might make a video about that subject specifically because there's a lot to discuss around that. It's got relatively little coverage because of the whole fallout from Carrie Gracie, the BBC China editor, who has actually described the pay dispute. She's described the BBC as acting like the Chinese state, which is interesting. But anyway, the reason I mentioned that is because Prime Minister's questions, when the Prime Minister's away, is filled by someone else. And on this occasion, it was filled by David Lidington, who is a senior cabinet member. He's the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which is an old ceremonial post. And he's cabinet minister, which is, well, a bit hard to describe actually. His opposite number, filling in for Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not sure where Corbyn was, but that's, I don't know, it's beside the point. Filling in for Jeremy Corbyn was Emily Thornberry, the shadow foreign secretary. Um, and someone's uploaded an exchange just between them rather than the whole Prime Minister's questions, which also includes questions from backbenchers. Now, the main issue that was brought up was firstly, Emily Thornberry was pointing out the fact that this year marks 90 years since full women's suffrage in 1928, which incidentally um, came. Sorry, I lost my trail of thought there. Yeah, 1928. So it's 90 years, 100 years since women's suffrage uh, was passed, but 90 years since full women's suffrage, which was more important because that was more universal. She brought that up as a context, as a pretext for discussing um, the voting age being lowered to 16. They had a back and forth exchange, and there were some good points made on both sides. I think Lidington got the upper hand. I think his points were more valid, and I think that the sort of things she was talking about are, I mean, she was talking about representation of women in parliament. Well, this comes down to that old left wing thing of equal outcome versus equal opportunity. The Tories are for equal opportunity, Labour is for equal outcome, and it isn't the same thing. With their all women shortlist and so on. He also pointed out that they have had two women prime ministers. Labour have had none. Emily Thornberry, I thought, gave a rather weak response to that. She said, "Oh, but and you're trying to get rid of her because of the growing dissent against Theresa May. But that isn't the reason they're trying to get rid of her, as she well knows. It's got nothing to do with Theresa May being a woman. It's because a lot of Tories feel that she's not being decisive enough on Brexit. Some of Theresa May's strongest critics are Tory women, like Andrea Leadsom and Justin Greening. So that's just a typical feminist response. It's because she's a woman. To be fair, these exchanges aren't easy. People are put on the spot and they're expected to come up with very sharp, witty answers. It's not an easy thing to do. But then again, when you're shadow foreign secretary, you should be on mark. Emily Thornberry, something of a controversial figure. A few years ago, she dismissed Labour voters as the uh, white van man, and that had a big backlash. It sounded quite elitist, and She got a big backlash for that. But the main issue I want to talk about here is the double standards that came up, and actually it came from John Bercow, which disappointed me because overall I think Bercow's a pretty good speaker. I think he's pretty balanced. I think he's on mark. I think he's very witty. On this occasion, I was disappointed because I thought he was virtue signaling, um, and it was a little bit nauseating to hear actually. He was raising, interrupting the exchange, which is his job to do, when presumably Tory MPs were heckling Emily Thornberry. Now, I agree with the principle that it's off-putting to the watching public, and sometimes, Prime Minister's questions that can look very infantile. You get these people who are elected to represent their constituencies basically throwing mud at each other, and it can be very infantile. What I take issue with is John Bercow's pretext for that. He tried to say that there was irony in a woman being jeered. The fact that Emily Thornberry is a woman is totally. I don't see why she should get special privileges. The implication there is um, if David Lidington was squaring off against a man in the exchange, that would be okay if they heckled a man in the same way. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn often gets heckled. So does male Labour MPs and male Tory MPs. So that's an immediate issue that comes about. Why the double standards, John Bercow? Why are you virtue signalling? But it wasn't just John Bercow. The Prime Minister apparently reprimanded David Lidington for the exchange. And this is what happened. Towards the end, Emily Thornberry described her opponents as cavemen on this issue about the voting age. Well, that's that could be argued as a sexist remark. It's gender specific. It's very dismissive. It's very condescending, and it's very insulting. Lidington came back with a quip about the Flintstones, and then he told her to grow up. And that seems to be the controversy, the fact that he told her to grow up. So telling her to grow up is somehow a bigger insult than calling him a caveman. And apparently May reprimanded him and said she wouldn't use that language. Well, that's probably May virtue signaling as well. Um, I have a real problem with that because if we accept that this is the reality of Prime Minister's questions, this is the reality of the rumble and tumble of Parliament, then why should women get a free pass just because they're the minority? Why should Emily Thornberry get to insult her opposite number or her opponents, but then as soon as her opponents, give a quip in the same vein, then that's sexism. That it's just the sort of double standards that absolutely embody feminism. And of course, feminists have been coming out and saying, "Oh, it's sexist," etc., etc. This just gets really tiresome because, to the feminist mindset, every time a man disagrees with them, it's because I'm a woman. He's patronizing me. He's putting me down. But they've no problem, calling him all the names under the sun. So it's these double standards that are just so insufferable. And we see all the time. When women MPs insult their male colleagues, they might receive public criticism, but they never get reprimands from on top. I mean, when Andrea Leadsom essentially said that all men who look after children are potential predators, that was an extremely inflammatory and sweeping statement. And yet there was a muted response from number 10, from Theresa May. Why? Imagine had one of her male ministers said something sweeping and sexist about all women. I mean, I just don't buy this thing that because women are in the minority, they therefore should get a free pass to be insulting. If we're going to change the culture of Parliament, then let's at least be consistent about it. I agree with Berkel that sometimes the tone is not good. Sometimes MPs in general can be infantile given the responsibility that they have. I do think there's a bit of too much of Punch and Judy goes on. It can be a bit it can be a bit pathetic when you see these um, grown men and women, behaving that way. But I say women as well because there's this idea that women should get a free pass. Why? Why? And on another subject that I read about in the paper, and this is This is not directly related, but again, it comes down to double standards. A French minister, a member of Emmanuel Macron's cabinet, I believe I quoted her, I've forgotten her name now, but apparently there's been a high profile murder case whereby a 34-year-old man murdered his 29-year-old wife for being overbearing. Now, the details, it sounds like a pretty heinous murder by all means, but apparently this minister has responded with shock and outrage. Well, I don't know the full details of the case, but it seems to be that's the premise because the defendant is saying that his wife was overbearing. Well, put it this way, if a woman murdered her husband for being overbearing, a lot of feminists would be saying, well done. You know, she stood up to a bully, good for her. Again, we have double standards. I'm not going to smear the victim. I don't know the exact circumstances of this case, okay? But the pretext, again, is just about double standards. That women can apparently, get away with something that men wouldn't be able to get away with. Um, or in this case, a man is being criticized for something that a woman would not be criticized for as a pretext to the situation. So I think that at its core is the biggest problem with Western feminism. It is basically about it's double standards, time and time and time again. Because every time there is an issue that impacts both genders, feminists say it's because I'm a woman. You know, seriously, just because what you do when you have this victimhood narrative is it means no matter what the other person says, they will be sexist in your eyes. So if a man, treats you equally and gives as good as he gets, oh, then he's being overbearing and bullying. If he, gets sarcastic, then he's being patronizing. But frankly, that is brought up even when he's not being sarcastic, when he's just countering a point. So I'm getting a little bit tired of women MPs constantly playing the I'm a woman card. Get over yourselves. You're elected to serve the people. You're not elected to constantly demand special privilege because you're a woman. And that's what I see happening. People can disagree with me on this, but that's what I see. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people out there see this as well. On the point of women being represented in Parliament, and that's maybe for another video, but I'll just say this briefly. I honestly think most people, male or female, their main concerns are issues like crime, education, health. Their number one issue is not, oh, is my MP a man or a woman? I really don't think most people think that way. The feminist movement thinks that's the only thing that people care about. And it's not. It really isn't. Because it comes down to the individual. And feminism has become symbolic of everything that is wrong with identity politics. It's arguably older than it. Like I say, first wave and second wave feminism had a lot more virtue than this divisive third wave feminism. But it does come down to this thing about, I should be given special treatment because I'm a woman. Equality means equality. It does not mean special treatment. So if you're going to jeer a man, if you're going to ridicule a man, if you, Emily Thornberry, are going to call him a caveman, then, expect a response. I'm so tired of the double standards. And those double standards need to be called out. And virtue signaling men who say things like, oh, she's a woman, give her special rights. I'm disappointed in Burko for that one. I know he's always had a thing about public perception, but I think he was wrong on this occasion because I could see actually in the exchange, a lot of the Tory MPs, including women MPs, were gesturing to Burko to reprimand Emily Thornberry for her caveman comment, and he didn't do that. So that to me was Burko virtue signaling to the feminists, and it's pathetic. But the double standards in general are just insufferable, and it means that you can't have a straightforward dialogue and civil discussion because it always comes down to, oh, it's because I'm a woman. Give me a break.